If your lower back pain keeps flaring up and nobody's been able to explain why, this video is for you. What I'm going to cover today is one of the frameworks I use in the clinic every time someone comes in with recurring lower back pain. It's called load and capacity. Let's get into it. The spine has a capacity. Think of it like a bucket. That bucket represents how much load the spine can comfortably handle at any given point in time. Load is everything the spine is asked to do. Lifting, sitting, walking, bending, even stress and poor sleep contribute to the overall load on the spine. Now here's the key thing. As long as the load stays within the bucket, things feel fine. But the moment that load tips over the edge of that bucket, that's when a flare-up can occur. And here's what most people miss. That bucket isn't a fixed size. It changes. After a poor night's sleep, a stressful week, reduced movement, it can reduce the bucket's capacity. So the load doesn't have to increase for a flare-up to occur. Capacity can simply decrease until that gap closes. And that's why flare-ups can happen during simple movements, such as bending over to put on shoes. It's not that the movement is dangerous, it's that the capacity was already reduced, and that small movement was enough to tip the bucket over. Think about the last time your lower back flared up. Was there an unusual movement, or did it just happen? Most people say it just happened, and then they spend weeks trying to figure out what went wrong. But when load and capacity is understood, the question shifts. Instead of asking what happened in the moment, the more useful question is, what was already going on in the days prior? Was sleep worse than usual? More time on the feet? A particularly stressful period? Less movement than normal? A sudden increase in physical activity levels? Because something shifted, and that something is what may have reduced the capacity until the gap closed. Before continuing, if this is already resonating and you're based in Adelaide, you can book an initial spinal physiotherapy session at the MSK Studio. This session covers full history, an assessment of what's actually driving your low back pain, and a clear plan for what to do about it. Link is in the description below. Now let's get back into it. So capacity changes, but what actually drives it down? There are a few key factors worth understanding here. Sleep. This is the one most people underestimate. Poor sleep may influence how the nervous system responds to load. A run of bad nights can affect what the spine is able to handle in the days that follow. Prolonged static positions. Sitting for hours on end fatigues the muscles that support the spine. Think about holding your arms straight out in front. After a few minutes, the shoulder fatigues. Not because something is wrong, just because it's been holding one position for too long. The spinal muscles work in a similar way. After a full day at the desk, they've been working for hours with minimal relief. Stress. This one tends to surprise people, but psychological stress can play a role in how the body responds to load. A high stress period may reduce capacity just as meaningfully as a physical factor due to the nervous system. Reduced movement. When movement decreases, the spine gets less of the nutrient exchange it relies on to stay healthy. The discs in the spine don't have their own blood supply. They rely on movement to draw in the nutrients they need from surrounding structures. No movement can mean reduced nutrient exchange. So all of these factors together, sleep, static load, stress, reduced movement, can quietly reduce capacity without any obvious warning until something tips it over. Now here's the part that often doesn't get communicated clearly. Capacity isn't fixed. It can be built over time. The goal isn't just to reduce load on the spine, it's to increase the size of that bucket so the gap between the load capacity stays wide enough so that everyday life doesn't keep closing it. Two things build capacity most effectively. The first is spinal mobility. Most people who exercise regularly are training around the spine, not training it directly. Sessions and stretches tend to focus on the arms and legs, but a spine that isn't moving well is a spine with reduced capacity. Stiff segments don't just sit there. They force other parts of the spine to compensate, and that's where load tends to accumulate. Incorporating dedicated spinal mobility work, daily targeted movement specifically through the spine, is one of the most effective ways to start building capacity. The second is progressive strengthening. Once mobility is established, strength is built on top of it. Not just isolated exercises, full body functional movement that progressively loads the spine in a controlled and graduated way. Over time, this builds the kind of capacity that means a long drive, a stressful week, or a heavy session at the gym is less likely to tip the bucket over. Here's an example of how this plays out in the clinic. A client came in recently, mid-50s, going to the gym 5 days a week, daily walks, stretching every single day. By every measure, they were doing everything right. So why did the lower back keep flaring up every year for the past 5 years? A long drive, bending over to put on their shoes, getting out of a chair. On assessment, the spine was stiff, not from lack of effort, but because every session, every stretch was focused on the arms and legs. The spine itself wasn't getting the attention it needed. So, despite all the activity, their capacity had a ceiling, and everything pushed past it. Even something small resulted in a flare-up. The starting point was daily spinal mobility work, targeted movement specifically through the spine. Once mobility was improved, progressive strengthening was laid in. Mobility first, strength on top of it. That's the sequence that tends to support capacity building over time. So what tends to help when a flare-up actually happens? First, a flare-up is a signal, not a setback. It's the spine indicating the gap closed. Second, look at what changed in the days before. Sleep, stress, movement, time on the feet. Finding the pattern tends to reveal the starting point. Third, keep moving. Reducing load temporarily makes sense. Taking a few days away from heavy training gives things a chance to calm down. But stopping movement altogether tends to slow things down rather than help. Some gentle spinal mobility work, a short walk, low load movement that keeps things ticking over. That's generally how capacity comes out the other side of a flare-up. So to bring it all together, back pain flare-ups aren't random. There's usually a pattern underneath. Load exceeded capacity. And the approach that tends to help long-term isn't avoiding load together, it's building a spine whose capacity is wide enough that everyday life doesn't keep closing the gap. For anyone that's been dealing with recurring low back pain, you can book an initial spinal physiotherapy session at the MSK Studio. This session covers a full assessment, identifies what's contributing, and maps out a clear plan. The link is in the description below. And if this was helpful, subscribe for more.